Welcome friends to another r/malicious compliance video. If you want to be a real pal, make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons down below. And our first story of the day is by Godless Davis Zero. Couldn't read at work but was allowed to write because it looked like I was doing something. When I was 19, I was a machine mechanic. I fixed automatic presses in a factory. My main job was to keep 2 and sometimes 4 machines running just as much as possible. When they were all running, I actually had very little to do. I could basically sit there and listen to the machines until one of them started acting up. I started bringing books to read to pass the 10 and 12-hour days. One day, the vice president of the company walks by and asks what I'm doing. I point at the 4 running machines and tell him that they're all running. He says, I can't sit on my workbench and read. I should be doing something. I tell him that the machines are running and until one breaks, there really isn't anything else to do. I already organized my tools and cleaned my work area. I just have to wait until something breaks. He says, no reading. I was still bored, so I decided to write a story. I figured I could tell a story just as good as the next guy. I started writing instead of reading. Writing at my workbench apparently looked like some kind of work and was just fine. A year later, the company decides to move, and the job would no longer be union, so I had the choice to move with the company without the union or go to college for retraining of some sort. I chose the retraining and took creative writing classes. Long story short, I now have a master's degree in English with creative writing focus. I've published several books, and I teach composition at a university for a crab load more money and usually for half a day. Summer's off. The vice president called me several times over the first 2 years to see if I would come back to work as a machine mechanic. I never even answered the phone when he called. I just let the answering machine get it every time. If he would have just let me read the crappy fiction I brought to work, I probably never would have thought about writing at all. I never would have gone to college, and I'd still be there waiting for the machines to break down. Isn't it crazy how sometimes the smallest of circumstances seemingly can lead to you finding a passion that goes on to be quite a monumental part of your life? If you had hours every single day to sit down and find a new passion, do you think you'd be able to find something like OP did that would change your mind as to what you want to do for a career? Let me know in the comments down below. Our next story is by JD1971. No headphones? Okay. So the boss came through and was pissed that one of the guys wearing headphones in the shop couldn't hear him yelling, so he said no headphones, period. Most of us wear the headphones as low-level hearing protection from saws, punches, etc. instead of earplugs, since the sounds aren't too loud but loud enough to need something. He wouldn't listen to reason. He was yelling and screaming all upset. Fine, we all put in earplugs instead and can hear a lot less than before. When he yells and we don't hear, he now can't say anything. I can't hear a darn thing. Alright, come on guys, we all gotta make sacrifices for our jobs here. If you get a little tinnitus, what's the matter? If you get a little hearing damage, what's the problem? We all get old anyway. It's like stop for a moment and think about what you're trying to ask us to do. You're trying to ask us to not wear hearing protection in a very loud working environment? I'm about to go call OSHA. Our next story is by Blah Blah. Don't want me to use ampersand, sir? Be careful what you wish for. So my political science professor can be a bit of a jerk. He's very particular about notes. Everyone must take notes in his class. The notes must be neat and legible. No fancy writings. No color pens other than blue or black. All notes must be dated. There must be an index. No abbreviations. Everything he says must be written, etc. Oh, did I mention that he talks faster than Eminem? So yeah, he expects us to take pristine notes while he talks about constitutions non-stop. I can write a little fast while maintaining a clean handwriting, so I could handle most of his requests. However, I couldn't abbreviate words. So instead of saving time by writing GOVT period, I had to write government. You get the picture. The professor had a habit of using and a lot instead of just breaking sentences. So instead of writing and, I would just use an ampersand. That's the only abbreviation I used. 2 days back, he requested to see my notes and saw the ampersands. He began telling me off in front of the whole class about how abbreviations were childish and unprofessional. What? And that if I ever used an ampersand again, he would reduce my grades. I was pissed. Then yesterday, he called me after class and asked me to transcribe a speech he had delivered a few days back, citing my neat notes as a reason for why he chose me. He said that I could use abbreviations because he wanted me to use as little paper as I could. He was going to photocopy it later. I took the recording home and decided to do it there. I think you know where this is going. The speech was about an hour long. I abbreviated all the words that can be abbreviated except for and. The and I wrote gloriously. Government? No, it's GOVT period. As soon as possible? No, it's ASAP. And? Yes, that shall remain the same. Every time I heard the word and, I wrote it a bit bigger to take up more space. I even counted how many ands he had used throughout the speech. 3,749 times. My hand and shoulder ached from writing, but I persevered. You bet I wrote all 3,749 ands. Today, I proudly presented 38 pages of transcript to my professor. If I had used the ampersands, I could have gotten it done in 35 pages. The professor was shocked that I used up so many pages. The following conversation took place in class with all the students who had witnessed him scolding me for using ampersands. The professor said, "Why couldn't you have used ampersands instead of writing and everywhere? You could have saved at least 3 pages." I said, "Oh, you told me you would reduce my grades if I ever used an ampersand again, sir." Professor, surprised Pikachu face.jpg. Enjoy spending an extra 20 cents, sir. Right at the very end, I think my main takeaway from this is actually that, believe it or not, it seems the surprised Pikachu face is just kind of slipping into our vernacular. It's kind of funny how a meme like that is actually just becoming more and more normalized to just be written out and included so that people understand the expression that's going on there. Also, I don't want to go long-winded on it, but I hate anybody that tells you have to take notes my way. Isn't taking notes so the person who writes the notes can understand it? As long as they understand it, they can write it in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs for all I care. They can go and write the whole speech in wingdings. Our next story is by Foreign Question 390. You don't want anything to drink? No problem. An oldie but a goodie for our family. When I was about 5 years old, I walked into the living room. My dad was watching TV. Mom and sister weren't home. I said to him, "Dad, do you want anything to drink?" He tells me, "No, I'm fine." Okay, so off I go. He says it was mighty quiet. I don't know how long he was watching TV and not watching me, but it was long enough that I had poured almost a full case of beer down the sink. He finally got up to investigate where I'd wandered off to and was able to save 2 beers from the drain. He said he couldn't be mad, was just in shock. He asked me, "What were you doing? Why did you do this?" My response? "But Dad, you said you didn't want anything to drink. I was just helping you." Always gets a laugh when it gets brought up. Well, when somebody says they don't want to drink, that doesn't necessarily mean that they want it poured down the drain. But to a 5-year-old, what can you really expect? This next story is by Tiny Avian, Wholesome Christmas Compliance. I don't like Christmas, not since I was a teenager, so as you can guess, I'm not for one keen on giving or receiving gifts unless it's under a certain value or it's something I'm after. Too often, I get stuff that I don't use for ages, or if I do get something I'm after, it's expensive. So as a rule, if I get something that goes over the limit for my birthday or Christmas, the next gift giving for me is skipped. Whilst my girlfriend understands this, she often doesn't agree with it, and here's where she gets devious. Last birthday, I received 3 role-playing manuals worth a pretty penny each. So for Christmas, I said I want nothing at all for Christmas from her, as she had spent enough for my birthday. She went to argue, but I shut it down quickly after airing my feelings on the matter, citing costs of the birthday presents. She said, "Fine, I'll get you nothing at all." Come last Christmas, I'm with her family on Christmas morning and she hands me a wrapped present. There were some giggles from the family as my face darkened, but I accepted the gift and proceeded to unwrap. Remember the game Pass the Parcel? That was the type of wrapping. I get down to the end and I have a small test tube with a piece of paper. On it is Ned Flanders in the skin-tight ski suit saying, "Nothing at all." The gift cost her a grand total of nothing, as all the materials she had used were essentially offcuts or knickknacks she acquired over the years. My response was, "Well played." On a side note, she has a habit of giving gag gifts. On my birthday, she had given me a blacklight torch for detecting spills. Feels like I'm wearing nothing at all. Nothing at all. Stupid sexy Flanders. And our final story of the day is by Renee Becker, How to Organize Creative Fun Staff Meetings. In the early teens of this century, I was the chief information officer of a large organization in my country. As a result of my problem-solving skills, the managing director, let's call him Paul, once in a while added problematic departments to my responsibilities. I even ran the communications department for a while. My star within the organization was rising, and at a certain moment, I was informed that I would get a new office, right next to Paul, for easy access. I also struck up a good working relationship with the chief human resources, Harry, and one of the senior directors, Pete. We'd regularly huddle in so-called working meetings, where we would drink coffee, discuss work, life, and watch hilarious YouTube videos. One of the topics that regularly came up was the meeting room situation. The board had decided that the meeting rooms were outsourced to a third party to rent out, and the third party paid a monthly fee. However, the third party charged us as well. So every time we wanted a staff meeting, we had to pay for the pleasure. This was a regular peeve as every extra would cost money. The coffee on every floor was free of charge, except in the meeting rooms. The big supporter of this was our own chief financial officer, Mark. Much hated by all, he would check everyone's spending line by line and would hammer you on every mistake. But if his department made a mistake, he'd send an email along the lines of, "Mistakes will be made, deal with it." The man had zero friends within the organization. During one of the management meetings, Mark went off on a totally off-topic rant concerning financial waste. Much sighing and irritated looks from all around. Paul, aware that we disliked Mark, did defend him by stating that we should cut back in spending and look at cheaper alternatives for everything. All of us concurred, we just wanted Mark to shut up. After the meeting, Harry and Pete walked up to me and said, "Go for lunch?" So we did. Harry started to say that he had gotten an idea. He explained it over lunch. Our eyes twinkled out of sheer maliciousness. Pete would talk to Paul to get him to agree on principle without explaining the details, and we would execute our plans. A day later, Pete passed by my office and, broadly smiling, just said, "We have a go." And thus the wheels were set in motion. I write a mail to my departments that the next staff meeting will be held in a nice bar next to a lake, and that the drinks and snacks will be on the company. First, we'll have a staff meeting, which I hope we can keep to the bare essentials, and afterward, it's a free-for-all. Prospects are that it'll be sunny, so bring sunscreen and sunglasses. Airbeds and beach balls are obligatory, office dress voluntary. If people want to swim afterwards, that's their choice. The positive reactions from employees were overwhelming. Harry's done it in his department as well, same result. In the next few days, a vibe goes through the departments. People are happy, motivated, and seem to be a bit giggly. The day arrives, sitting on a beach under a warm sun with cold drinks in hand. Because we're not barbarians, my staff and I work through the staff meeting in record time. All departmental heads have prepared written reports and distributed them via email in advance. So the only thing I do is, comments? No comments? Next item. The rest of the afternoon is seeing grown-up people behave like kids, splashing water all over the place, sunbathing, and enjoying a wine or beer. 2 days later, I'm called into Mark's office. I walk in, doing my best impersonation of a saint, filled with an air of holy innocence. A vein on his beet red head is bulging. I position myself strategically at the meeting table so that I can duck when his head explodes. "What in the heck is this?" He throws down the bill for the staff meeting. I glance at it. 800 euros or around there for about 30 odd people. Drinks, snacks, and the rental of some beach beds. Well within limits. I say, "That's a bill for my staff meeting." They say, "That's not a staff meeting, that's a staff outing. And that should be authorized in advance by Paul with a budget." I say, "No, that's a staff meeting. I would like to remind you that how and when I conduct my staff meetings is my sole responsibility. Furthermore, you emphasized during our last management meeting that we need to cut back on costs and look for alternatives. So, I did. Let me ask you, if I rent a meeting room for 30 plus people here, half a day with coffee and tea, a projection screen, access to the network, and a projector, how much does that come to be?" He does some quick calculations and comes to roughly 1,200 euros. With an angelic face, I look at him and say, "So I saved about 400 euros. Now, what exactly is the problem?" The way he contorts his face makes me fear we'll have to get an ambulance. "The meeting room rental is a source of income for us. We must support them. I will not stand for this. We're seeing Paul right now." I say, "Sure, whatever floats your boat." So off we go and march into Paul's office. There, Mark explains the whole affair while I keep looking innocent. Paul lets me explain my side of the story, and I reference the calculation. Paul smiles and says, "In my opinion, a very creative way to cut costs and enhance morale. I wish more people would think this way. And may I remind you, Mark, that it was you yourself who stated that we should look at everything. Maybe you should try it as well." With those words, he makes a subtle gesture we all know means, "You're dismissed." As we make our way out of the office, Paul calls me back and says, "Oh, can you stay for a moment and close the door? I'd like to discuss something with you." So I close the door and sit down. Paul says, "Of course, Pete already briefed me and I personally signed off on it as I really think it is creative and hilarious. I'll allow it as it has had a positive effect on employees. However, don't force Mark to have a heart attack. He's a bit of a, I know, but he's also good at his work." I say, "So you don't mind if we yank his chain once in a while?" He says, "Yank away, maybe he'll loosen up." I say, "Well, you also know that Harry's done the same?" He says, "I know. I'm looking forward to the tantrum with the bulging vein already." He chuckles. At that exact moment, some pretty salty language makes its way through the door, and about as dry as a martini, Paul says, "I think Harry's staff meeting bills turned up." From that moment on, Paul became a regular participant in our working meetings. Our staff meetings became pretty well visited after that, with a soundtrack of the gnashing of teeth of one certain colleague. Shoot, maybe Mark should come along to the meetings. Maybe he'd learn to unwind a little bit more. I guess though, the ones that are the best at the budget are probably the ones that are the biggest sticklers, despite the fact that they often end up being the fun suckers. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So of all these stories I've read today, which is your favorite and why? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you haven't yet, if you could like and subscribe, that would mean a lot to me. Whatever you do, whether it's liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, all of it helps grow this channel and I appreciate the heck out of it. So until next time, I'll see you all tomorrow with some more stories.